music. I stopped doing the music because commercials and ads and
You stopped doing the music
yeah,
because why?
commercials and ads.
Uh,
Once we get our first like $5 coming in from Twitch or something like that, then I'll use that money towards Spotify.
gotcha.
How you doing today, Sir Paul?
I am doing well, sir. How are you?
Forgot to change shirts for you. I apologize for that.
Forgiveness and love surround you, John.
What you been working after today?
Well, a variety of things, honestly, with clients. I mean, it's kind of a cornucopia of stuff every day. But the main thing, the thing that I find is the most common when working with people, honestly, is how unprepared people are to share information about what's bothering them.
How so?
You know what I mean? So whenever we have something occur, and it's inhibitive, and so we go and seek help about it. I mean, we've all heard the recordings of like 911 calls. 911, what's your emergency? And someone goes, my husband and I were traveling we were driving down the freeway, and drunk driver came out of nowhere. This guy was swerving ever since we got on, and in this 5 minutes of explanation, my husband's laying over there unconscious and bleeding. I lost a shoe. My car's upside down. I don't know what the deal is. The windshield's busted. So on and so forth, right? And then the operator always says, "What's your location?"
Right.
In these 5 minutes that we've been talking, I don't have any information about what your location is.
Mm-hmm.
I just was outside under the trees, and these shaking out pine needles.
Oh.
Um,
And
so
at the park, this is the season where little
yeah.
spiders be coming down, and man,
Oh yeah, no. Yeah. You want to see me do battle when?
Safe. I know most spiders are like safe or not gonna hurt me, but anything that can bite me and like send me to the hospital.
Yeah, yeah. But when we're sharing information about whatever an injury is, like we focus on, we tend to, and all of us do this, and so I'm not shitting on anybody at all, right? We tend to share information about how it impacted us, mm-hmm. or what we are no longer able to do, rather than what the actual limitation or pain is, mm-hmm. right? So
now, how do you feel about that being also just part of the processing of it?
We all do it. It is inextricable, right? It's one of those things. No matter how clearly and concisely you communicate information, and someone said, we've all heard the phrase, "Look, just the facts." We all make jokes out of it, just the facts. Mm-hmm. But no matter how clearly and concisely you can convey information verbally, mm-hmm. you still are going through what led up to that in your mind, right? And that's true for all of us. So for me, when I'm communicating information like that, like trying to talk about the event, I try and stick to the event. I'd rather have the person ask clarifying questions rather than me give extra details.
Yeah, I mean, I feel too that way. Is sometimes you want to try to give as like what is the actual problem? What is try to stay as close to the bone of it as it were, versus too much mm-hmm. of the fat of it. But I also find too, with at least from my perspective, working with clients, that sometimes it's almost like they're working through kind of am not a mental health professional at any means, nor do I try to pretend to be one or want to be one. But I find that too, that like that mental aspect of trying to get over the injury or accept some of the what they perceive to be their fate.
Mm-hmm.
Was the levels of you're not a psychologist for your clients. God no, Coach Sam. I do not. I just sit there and go, But you have these assumptive ends, right? Again, you have a shoulder injury.
Mm-hmm.
You probably some people may assume that they're never going to be able to play sports or some sort of athletic events that they used to be able to do, or they have to adjust their entire living situation such that the things that they really need are chest height and
Mm-hmm.
everything that is really really rare. They'll pull the stool out to reach up overhead to get to.
Well, and as we're communicating those things, we're also met, right? We're also met with, well, on that note first, that kind of thing needs to be met with a lot of compassion, because when someone's trying to deal with something that is at every point impactful to their lives, right, it becomes emotionally significant.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's emotionally significant, it's really difficult to isolate, in granular fashion, how just this one piece of information is the most relevant to this person, because all of it's relevant to you, right?
Right.
As the person who's feeling it. And then
point,
there's the thing. Go ahead. Oh, and then there's the two aspects of, is the person you're communicating with, you don't know if they're getting viable information out of what you're sharing, and that they very well may be, but they very well may also not be, and they might not know how to ask guiding questions to get you there. So there's a lot of frustration that develops out of that, and it's, unfortunately, it's something that there just doesn't ever seem to be, no matter how much we try, a good way to get around.
Well,
anyway,
experience.
Go ahead.
Sharing the human experience, right? Well, all of that to be said, the thought that came into my mind was, you had a client once. Well, I guess she wasn't really ever a client. You had a interview or an assessment, or I don't know what you would call it, Paul. But this lady came into you for some sort of pain. I don't know exactly the conversation y'all had, but you basically told her, well, you don't have to not get rid of the pain. You can keep your pain. And she sat there and she chose to keep it.
Well, the question I always ask I ask everyone this question who has been with whatever their pain is for like longer than a couple of years, because if it's been like over 5 years, there's a lot of accommodation that they've made in their lives about it, right? Like purchases for adaptive situations have been made, or accommodations have been structured, like shelving built differently in houses, or ramps created, for reaching things easily, or whatever, stepping stools everywhere, a limitation on performative efforts, like, or even travel, kind of thing. So I ask people, what the way the question most often manifests is, what kind of relief are you looking for? Are you looking for like a total kind of relief, or is it just something, if you can just get it to a certain level, you'd be happy with it? Because if you're experiencing it, how many times have we all said, if I could just get this to like hurt a little less, I'd be fine. And so, and when she asked me to clarify, and I said, well, this pain's been with you for a long time. It's been like your companion. And even if it's something that we don't like, we still know we can count on it. And she had a real moment of catharsis. And she was like, I don't think I am ready to let it go. Yeah. Right. And when she said that, I don't think I am ready to let go. That was a real moment for her. And then she was like, no, I think I'm okay. Actually, you're right. I have created my life and I'm happy with my life the way it is. And that was it. It was the most honest thing I've ever encountered working with someone. So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, in that same vein though of shoulder or of pain and alleviating pains, right? Tonight we're going to try to have I guess, let you kick it off, I guess, talking about shoulder pain.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of what kind of what we see as shoulder pain, and kind of go a quick anatomy of shoulder and rotator cuff anatomy more specifically, and kind of
Right.
how we think or see common or modern Western medicine practices where they short, and then kind of how we
Well,
approach it as well, I think, right?
yeah. So a lot of injuries tend to take on what I privately think of as water cooler talk. It's where we're all standing around, we start talking about a thing that all of us are familiar with, and we all agree on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like when someone says, "Oh, I'm going to get some water," and you go, "What's wrong?" You go, "I'm dehydrated." "Oh, you need more electrolytes." And you go, "Well, what is an electrolyte?"
Mm-hmm.
Or someone says something like, "Oh, I need to avoid carbs," and you go, "Why?" And they go, "Well, I've gained too much weight." And you go, "Well, have you thought about focusing on calories instead of just carbs?"
Mm-hmm.
And someone said, and then response, there's this like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, but if I were to go, "Oh, I'm cutting out carbs," I get a lot of sympathy with it, right? A lot of commiseration and a lot of that kind of thing. And it's just, if injuries tend to fall into this thing where we have a lot of social acceptance around their misfortune and what we all do, to deal with them. So when we talk about like, are you going after like what are some of the common things that we have, or like what do people often, what is their impression with it? What do you mean?
What do I mean with what do I mean? No, I just so again, my mind's eye is again. I know you have two shoulder injuries, correct? Or
Mm-hmm.
two shoulder tears.
Yeah, I have one as a result of when I was in my competition days in competitive fighting. Um, got taken down on the mat rather harshly. It was unkind. It was unkind and unfriendly.
Hence the type of competition.
Right. Not only was it done harshly, it was also done in a way that left me with some persevering discomfort. That being said, though, anybody that's in like sports, right? I mean, even if it's a contact sport, you'll come up against something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a far smaller demographic than kind of everybody, but it's one that everybody in that demographic is going to have to deal with at one point or another. The other one I got while weightlifting, and that was when I was way younger and still figuring out form and function and all that. And it was one of those things where I misidentified pain as a marker of progress.
Yep.
Right. Which, well, that's just because you're weak. You need to keep it up, keep it up.
Pushing through it, huh?
Push through it. It'll get easier. Push through it. And
so we have
go
three
ahead.
videos I think Paul had curated for us. I say videos, three shorts. We're gonna blast through them real quick because I think this is gonna highlight a lot of contemporary methods of shoulder recovery and shoulder mobility exercises. And then we'll get back into what you did for your shoulders then, and maybe kind of throughout even that journey for yourself. And then I think also we wanted to go over the shoulder anatomy as well with this.
Sure.
So let me show the bacon, the sausage. All right.
So right there, that image, right, doesn't seem like it's going to start off well.
1,037. That's how many days it's been since I tore my rotator cuff in a motorbike accident. In 2019, I was traveling around the world in CrossFit, and then I got in an accident. It's been a long road to recovery, but I'm finally back to doing all the movements that I love, and here are some of the exercises that helped me get there. The first part of the process was doing a lot of testing to figure out where my weaknesses were. For me, that was external rotation, so a lot of my rehab process focused on that. Mobility was a big priority, especially T-spine mobility to improve my overhead position. We progressed my stability, proprioception, and strength, as well as added in some conditioning. As things progressed, they got more and more sport specific, helping me with the movements that I need to do in CrossFit. It has been a long road to recovery, and I'm not quite there yet, but I hope that this helps you get there too. 1,030.
I thought the tab was muted. To my chagrin, it was.
That's okay. Let me do some quick math here.
I don't know. How things work.
You know, for as much as all of this is relevant and like we've encountered it and all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And come up with some really amazing solutions for people and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I still get overwhelmed when I get messages like I just got, which is my mom's having trouble with her computer. Anyway, so this woman, I just want to make something clear before we can watch these videos and go talk about it. But let's keep in mind the first video, that athlete has been dealing with that injury for
2 years,
just under 3 years.
Yep.
Right? Okay. Let's proceed. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Then we got one more. It's this guy.
Only God can judge me now. One shot, everything rides on two. I never feared death but dying. I only fear death but trying. I am whatever I am. Only God can judge me now. One shot, everything rides on two. I never.
Okay.
All right. So those are just what you found them as a quick, just over the YouTubes, as it were, searching for
just
shoulder pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so what from the get-go, right? What are some things that we see in shoulder pain, or what are the things that is when you're with clients that you're noticing with shoulder pain?
Well, I
just saw Coach Sam's words of encouragement over there.
Right. Yeah. It was gentle encouragement. From a scale perspective, there are a couple of commonalities. One is ambiguous diagnoses or explanations of things that are held to be informative.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is the perceived complication that rehab is going to manifest in.
How do you explain those, or can you break those down?
So the ambiguous diagnoses can be kind of anything.
It's like the tendinoses, the tendinitises, golfer's
Right.
elbows, jumper's knee,
Right.
fasciitis, those kind of terms.
Yeah, and things like rotator cuff, right?
Okay.
I think in all of those videos, they talked about rotator cuff, right? I tried that with my team once. They said,
Test them out next time.
gentle parenting. So for instance, someone says something like, I tore my rotator cuff. And, a doctor comes in somewhere and says, you tore your rotator cuff. Not putting anything on the doctor's level of understanding of that, or the physio's understanding of that. It may be vast and replete. But when someone says, oh, I tore my rotator cuff, I'm sorry, they get a diagnosis. Oh, you have a torn rotator cuff. There's this acceptance of the diagnosis without any understanding of the diagnosis. Like nobody goes, well, what is that? Mm-hmm. And if you ask 10 out of 10 people who don't fuck around with anatomy 24/7, what's a rotator cuff? They'd go, oh, like in your shoulder? Mm-hmm. And we envision it as like this like vertebrae almost. It just sits like it's a thing, like it's this one thing, this identifiable. I can put a laser pointer on it.
Well, it's
portion
a very
of the shoulder
thing too in the human body, isn't it? How we take, let's say, very specific and nuanced jargon terms. Take care, Coach. Be well. Thanks for stopping by, my man. But we see this very commonly without the human body, or in large part, right? It's the hamstring complex, it's the quad complex, it's your abdominals, it's the core, it's the rotator cuff, where you do rotator cuff exercises. So on one hand, I understand it in that sense that it's buckets for simplicity's sake. It helps communicate an idea. And then I think to some part, somewhere along the lines, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn for doctors here, but it gets to, in talking with a few of my clients who are MDs, it becomes a bit of like, even for them, like they're trying to churn out people. It may not be why they got into the business. It may not be why they got into the profession, but a lot of times doctors get into this mode where they're having to hit numbers, as absurd as that may sound. And so it becomes where I got to get this idea out to someone as quick as they can and move on, kind of a deal. There's a very cynical side of it too, where especially when you get to orthopedics, right? There's the more surgeries that they get to generate and cash out, the faster a speedboat, their cigarette boat they're going to be buying. So, you can have that cynical aspect of it too, but I think part of it is the system is a little bit rigged against people, in that you only get 15 minutes with your doctor, no matter where you are in your understanding of human anatomy. And it's on the doctor to try to meet you where you are. And sometimes that just doesn't happen, just because we're all humans in this endeavor. And so these these little buckets get made. The shorthands come up, and we just kind of accept it because it's a person of authority kind of telling us this thing from a position of like, don't you already know the rotator cuff?
I tend to think of it as so if we take the rotator cuff specifically, and some orthopedist walks in and says, oh, you have a torn rotator cuff, and you go, oh, okay. I think that the impression, and probably rightly, I mean, I don't know, I don't see 1,000 patients a day, right? I don't have patients, and I don't see 1,000 of them a day. Mm-hmm. I am not mandated by an overarching, an overlord who is all-seeing, telling me that my patient interaction time needs to be limited to 5 minutes per patient.
Right.
That's a thing that I heard from a doctor, right? Like they get told that their patient interaction, they get told that, right? So most often what we're after is, do you know what's wrong with me? Yes. Mm-hmm. What do I do to fix it?
Yes.
this, right? Yeah, this. And I mean, it's like, these 900 things. You do these 900 things.
The further the journey really is, you go to your primary care physician, most likely. You tell them your story. They sit there, listen to you go, knowing that they're not going to be able to really help you. Write you a script either for pain pills if you ask for them, or write you a script for physical therapy if you ask for it, or if it seems necessary. Maybe they write you a script for an x-ray depending on what you're talking about. If you're thinking like you need an MRI or something, and then you got to take that next step and so on and so forth. And then each level, you have to retell that story again.
Yeah. And then there's the other aspect of like, well, what's wrong with me? Well, there's your rotator cuff. And what your rotator cuff is, and you might say, I know what it is. Do you? Right? Do you think of it as that little vertebrae that sits in your shoulder? Or are you aware that it's a group of 4 muscles that tie in at a specific point and all the other actual shit that goes along with it? Or maybe you go, well, what's that? And the doctor starts to explain it to you and your eyes start to glaze over. And just look, I mean, can I just do something?
Right. So what are you said there's 4 of them. What are the 4?
Let's see. It's muscles. The 4 muscles are supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis.
That man a ribbon.
What's that?
Let's get that man a ribbon.
Thank you.
If anybody was in chat, they can give us a thumbs up or something, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that the term cuff is a little misleading because it implies like this single thing, right? The single tangible, right,
your
thing,
cuff,
right? Like
your shirt cuff, your pant cuff.
Right, shirt cuff. It implies like this. That needs a cuff, and it implies some kind of collar-looking thing, right? And it's misleading. That's not on. There's no one alive currently who is responsible for that, right? Like, yeah.
Probably Google it and figure out the etymology of it, but what is that going to be?
Right. So when you're looking at certain, go ahead.
What are the ones that you tore, or what are the 2 that you have injured? I don't know if they were torn.
Okay, so for me, it was on the one side, it was the supraspinatus, which is the muscle that sits at the top and goes along the top angle of the shoulder blade on one, and then on the other one, and then on the other side, it was the infraspinatus. So the one that sits, if you were to peel away a person's skin, don't do that. But if you were look at a model,
public service, don't do that, please. Don't.
Right, don't do that.
I saw these guys on the internet.
Right, they told me I should. I wanted to get a look at it. Don't do that. There's plenty of available imagery. If you look at an image of the skin peeled or what they call reflected, the official term is reflected. If you see an image online that has the skin reflected so that the muscle and bone are exposed. Oh, there we go. Yeah. You can see there that the infraspinatus is the one that sits below the skin, but in front of the shoulder blade. So for me, that when I fell, when I got kind of twisted around, and was thrown, that was the one that was overextended, and that's where most of the impact happened. The supraspinatus one occurred. Well, it was supraspinatus, and I had a teres minor issue, but that was as a result of doing shoulder-specific exercises, right? Lifts.
Okay.
I want to get into something though. Having said that, just because something happened or where it manifested was lifting weights, that's just where it got exacerbated, or the intensity of it was introduced because we work out how we move and live.
Right.
And it's quite likely that in that aspect of my life, I was doing plenty of other things. Like I can tell you for sure, whenever I would go to like throw a punch, I would throw a punch in such a way where those muscles were responsible for far more than they should have been. Or when I would throw a block, those muscles were far more responsible for things than they should have been. They weren't participatory.
So when you say that, how would you identify that? Or how do you know that was happening? Or is this an after the fact conclusion?
Oh, for me, that was way after the fact, right? Like, so, 1 second. Let me try and adjust something. I'll be right back.
Okay. But so I don't have any torn tears in my shoulders, but for me personally, in shoulder health, I know I've had issues with like clicks and pops when trying to do overhead pressing. For sure, lots of issues for me in between my shoulder blades up into like the neck. Well, it's not one of the rotator cuffs, the levator scapulae, so it kind of sits on top of the shoulder, up towards the neck, into the back of the head. And so those are ones that I've had issues with, specifically when it comes to extended bouts of running. So ultimate frisbee would normally flare up on me. Never really pinpoint the culprit of it. I'm assuming it had to do with a lot of shoulder and chest and fatiguing and my head falling forward.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing, like identifying stuff, right? You either go about it in one of two ways. Either you learn a lot about it through through research, and back when that happened, my option was to go to the library. What might you be mimicking? Are you mimicking stone tablets, or are you mimicking like horse?
Just a modem.
Oh, ding, 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 ding. No, no. Back when that happened,
5 hours later, we have instant messenger.
Pretty much. You've got mail. No, for me back then, so really there are only two ways to go about it. You either do a lot of experimentation or a lot of research, and you fade back between one or the other, or you combine them, right? So that's what I did. I did the experimentation first.
Or you default to a professional, so to speak.
Right. Well, I'm talking about if you're gonna deal with it, and that So I kind of look at going to a professional as like on the research side of things, right? So you like go and try and figure out what the problem is, and that's one of the tools. For me, it was a lot of experimentation, and then learning about which muscles were responsible for which movements. Yeah. On the supraspinatus and teres minor side, I had this one specific kind of a punch that I really liked to do, right? Which was this like kind of sideways thing instead of a jab or a cross, or I was also really fond of like this hook, right? So I would do a lot of those, and then I would also position myself in such a way that I'd throw a punch out to the side at an opponent. Mm-hmm. The way that I would position my arm was such that my supraspinatus was largely responsible for the lift of that arm, which is fine. It's just not all that healthy. And then when I went and added like a load bearing responsibility to that, eventually it resulted in injury that was
then
possible to ignore.
Happening, which is you're effectively were training that supraspinatus to move in that motion, and over time, the tear happened because it was pulling against a stronger muscle, that of the pec or potential lats. Or the serratus anterior. Okay.
Yeah. Serratus anterior, and like muscles that sits right here. And if you think that that's not a strong muscle, then like push your elbows down, because it is kind of a bridge between the pec and the lat, right? I mean, you engage that and you can have them both active. Now try and get someone to pull your elbow away from your side.
Not happening.
It's not easy.
Yeah, that's a whole self-defense martial arts kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah. Like it's just, yeah,
Well,
you
but
lock it
also even
down.
that, like taking it away from not just that aspect, but anytime we bring our limbs closer into us, we are always stronger. Like again, I always say a short muscle is a strong muscle. You can't have your muscles any much shorter than when you're pressing bone into bone.
Yep. That's right. So
What was the healing process for you then? How was that journey? I assume you went through some sort of Western medicine, physical therapy for any of this, or no? Was this purely your own self-education?
Before I say what I'm about to say, I want to make it clear that my story is not everyone's story. So the frustration and things that I felt with what I was after aren't necessarily reflective of what you will experience by going to a professional.
Mm-hmm.
And I was quite young, right? So there's also the aspect of when you go and you talk about something, the doctor, and the younger that you are, the doctor doesn't know if you're just trying to get out of school or if you're just full of shit and want pain pills or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. That's never been my goal. I would gladly miss a day of school, but like, talking shit for, pain, like medication relief wasn't my thing.
I didn't know that game existed at that age.
Me either. So yeah, I did go and seek help for it, and I would get told the regular stuff, like
rest.
Oh yeah, you what's that?
Rest it, ice it.
Rest, ice, compression, elevation, all of that, right? Which I don't know how I'm supposed to elevate that, but sorry, yeah. So like do like this, because that hurts, right? Anyway, no, the normal advice about rest, ice, compression, and then going through the normal exercise. When I was finally referred over to somebody, going through the normal exercises like put your hand on the wall and crawl your fingers up and all of that. All of the standard things that are in place to help with a variety of shoulder injuries, and in many cases those things are reflective of some degree of relief, whatever it is. For me, it wasn't that, because I was still competing and training and stuff like, and all of the offending behaviors I was still committing. So I did get a little bit of pain relief, but it wasn't until I actually started thinking about how muscles interacted with each other, not just muscles that were injured and what they weren't doing, like what they couldn't do in the face of other far stronger expressions, right?
The true underlying mechanics of the interactions. Yeah, and to that point, I think in some cases, with my clients that I've had, and I'm sure some of your clients share the same experience, is that the physical therapy only seems to focus on the acute pain.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to always incorporate the entire system of the body.
Well, there are the forces that are stunted, and there are the forces that are acting on those stunted forces, right? Not all, and maybe not most. I don't know what the statistics are, but not all PT or rehab does this, but it might seem like it's more than not, because all we deal with is like what the people who didn't experience success,
so to speak. I know that's a harsh way of saying it, but the people we serve are the ones that haven't found success there. So all we do here is where it's not succeeded. And
no one calls either one of us to go, hey, I just want to let you know I went to PT and it was badass.
It's completely derailed. So when my wife got really sick a couple of years ago with, she ended up getting like a triple whammy of COVID, pneumonia, and the flu all at once.
Your wife?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. We moved to an emergency clinic first because she worked in the ER at the time. She's like, you're not going to the ER. But we were at the emergency clinic. when we were asking questions, and one of the questions she asked was, well, how long does like people take to get over this? And I was laughing to myself, and I said, dear, no one calls the emergency care clinic to tell them that they're feeling better. Like, you know, you only see them again if it gets worse, kind of a thing. You just get your script and out the door you go.
So yeah, we never really hear about the successful rounds of PT, which I am 100% confident there are many, 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 absolutely, and probably more than there are not.
Absolutely.
And we also have to understand how people gauge success. You know, is this person stronger than they were before, or are they less limited?
Yeah.
Right. For the people that end up dissatisfied with their results, right? The overwhelming commonality is that whatever PT they went through focused on what was not performing well, not what was not performing well, and what forces were acting on it to inhibit it and not allow it to perform well.
You know, it makes me think of house remodeling.
Okay.
And so, like here in Houston, a lot of houses are built on slabs. So a solid piece of concrete is just dropped on the ground. They level it out and all that, but they drop that down and build a house.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about good old Houston ground is we have this stuff we call gumbo, which is a mixture of clay and dirt that I'm sure it's got many good purposes, but the temperatures here wax and wane, and as we have hurricanes or flooding, this gumbo can either get really, really dry and start cracking and shrinking, or again, it swells up with the moisture. So the ground shifts a bit. And so if you have a house with a slab foundation and you start getting cracks in the walls or windows don't close right, your first knee-jerk reaction might be to rip the walls out and put new walls in. Or it might be to rip the windows out and put new windows in. And then in about a year's time, your shit's going to be just, again, fucked up. Because the true problem is this shifting ground and this crack in the concrete that your house is sitting on. And so you have to fix that cracked foundation and get your foundation squared away. Then you can do the other remodeling and let that last. And then that will go for another 10, 15 years until, again, things start settling. But that's a different issue.
Yeah, well, that very much is kind of the same thing. You know, when we're dealing with the majorly, it is by far the most common diagnosis of a shoulder injury, which is a rotator cuff injury. We're dealing with that. We are often thinking about rehabilitating, rightly, the affected muscles, but we don't really work on the affecting muscles.
Right.
And as a result of that, we tend to manifest certain things that either produce imbalances in other parts of our body, as we saw in one of those videos that we can point out in a minute. Or we, okay. So
to that point, that makes me think of, sorry to keep cutting you off in this, there's a sense of the car analogy, the steering wheel analogy is what this makes me think of now. And so when we have so if we have a car that always pulls to the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could pull the steering wheel straight or more to the right, past square, to where you'll at least drive straight now. And this will work for a time until the steering mechanisms deteriorate further and further to where you can turn the steering wheel all the way to the right and you're still not driving straight anymore. You're still veering to the left. Like our bodies work in that similar kind of capacity is like if you have a forward tilt to your shoulders, everything you do will be presented with that forward tilt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And even the littlest tilt you have, when you're trying to work your rotator cuff somehow, that tilt is present. And so you're not really training that rotator cuff. You're not really training your body to drive straight. You're still trying to drive straight with your steering suspension actually turned, but you're creating what you feel is straight. And that progressively gets worse and worse and just feeds that cycle, I feel.
Yeah, that is fair. What's interesting also is, like, going to a car analogy, if you have a tire that keeps popping, so you keep replacing tires, that's kind of the same thing, right? But it's not until, like, you look at the rim, or you look at even if you replace the rim and the tire keeps on popping, and you go, well, wow, something might be bending the rim periodically, like the road that you're driving on, deep potholes, and that ends up messing up your rim, which ends up popping your tire. So the same thing kind of holds true. One of the things is that we either create imbalances in other parts of our body trying to accommodate it, or we end up not truly targeting the specific area,
right?
Because there are other imbalances already in play. So it always intrigues me, like, whenever you see somebody going through shoulder rehab, or any kind of rehab, how specifically most of the exercises focus on building equilateral strength on both, like both rotator cuffs are injured or something. And if it's only or a muscle in one of the rotator, or in both of the rotator cuffs is injured, because the exact same exercise is performed on both sides, right? When it very well might be some overcompensation on one side that's producing the overcompensation on the other side. So it really is the same thing as saying, my left leg is far weaker than my right one, and so I have you go do, like, regular squats, right?
Yeah.
You are going to tend into, even if you're working like some kind of dumbbell action or something like that, you're still going to tend into the side that's stronger. You're still going to shy away from the side that's weaker. And very few of the exercises for functional, quote unquote, functional rehabilitation focus on specifically the one side. You'll see some of them, like there's, dropping the ball and then catching it, on the one side. But when you're doing, like, the military press, or the lateral raises, or
now, there's something to be said, though, I would argue, is that I can see benefit in hyper focusing on the one injured side, but then also training both to work in harmony. In that
100%.
In that there's different motor pathways, if that's the right term, or neural pathways. So, like, when we're commanding one arm to do the motion, that's one particular pathway from the brain through the neurons and all that. When we select two, while it's the same motion and it's very close in the brain, so to speak, next door, it is still two different pathways that we're having to operate, or a different pathway of circuitry that is operating. And because you'll see this too with some clients where they have an injury and you ask them to lift their arms up, and they lift it to the limit of the injured arm, unbeknownst to they could actually go all the way further with the uninjured arm, but the neural pathway has been kind of hijacked by the injury. So that's where I could see where it could be a benefit to where we still come back and do some that bilateral work along with that heavy unilateral work with the injured side. How does that sound to you?
Absolutely. That is true, man. However, what most often develops, and again, we should say here that if you think that because it was sustained during a weightlifting or a competitive performance or whatever, the injury was sustained in something that was non-applicable to you or your lifestyle. The fact is that it is applicable to you and your lifestyle, because those are just loaded movements of what we all do all the time. Right. It's not like how you hurt you have carpal tunnel? Are you typing a lot? No, I don't have carpal tunnel. I have this one specific injury that's like right here. And you go, well, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, well, I'm a professional thumb wrestler. Mm-hmm. That's a highly specific thing, and not many of us engage in this thing where we're having to do that, exclusively. How we lifting weights often mimics the stuff that we do in daily life. It's just in repetitious, loaded, and hopefully safe expressions. So the thing about training both sides does have merit. The problem there exists is that the mirror of what we just talked about, how training both sides has merit, and like the exclusivity of whatever. The counter argument to that, though, is most often what ends up happening is that those limitations in lifting this one and lifting this one, even though this one could lift higher, those are things that almost always only manifest in performative effort. Because my house is going to be set up if I'm like, oh, I'm going to reach up and grab that with my good arm, or let me go and grab this with my strong hand, So that limitation is more narrow in where it's applied, right?
That's fair.
Anyway.
So then all that to be said then is, so the way I guess we look at it and your evolution from how when you injured yourself then many, many years ago. Score? Wasn't four score?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus, you got his
I was going to show you this.
I thought I was going to get one of these coming up.
No, I wanted to show you what was in here.
Oh, there it is.
Anyway, go ahead.
So looking back at it, and I feel this is a common kind of bro science thing too, is, you want to work your rotator cuff, you want to work your back. And so we work these specific exercises just for those muscles. But yet again, to your point, we haven't focused on, and I love how you describe it. It's the three things that acts on a muscle. So there's the weight of, like, if we take our bicep, there's the weight of the forearm that the bicep has to take into consideration.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The weight of the glass that this bicep has to work against. But what we don't ever consider truly, I don't feel, is the resistance and the tension of the tricep that we must work against as well. Now, in a perfect body, uninjured, without compensating patterns and such, that happens flawlessly because of just how the body works. We develop habituations, though, into Paul's injury story, right? He was lifting his arm in this kind of odd way. Now, how many punches do you think you do in a fight, right? I don't watch a lot of fights, but I think it's about maybe 100, 200 punches thrown.
Well, just in a competition, sure. I mean, if it's just a competition, if you're talking about only the time when you're competing, it could be. Depends on how lucky you are.
True. But if you're to like just spitball a number out there, right? Would you say about 200? Not necessarily hits, but like thrown punches and landed punches. 100?
Well, I mean that I don't want to get really like granular with it, but it depends on
there is a set number of repetitions that's going to happen in a comp. And that is nowhere near amount that is happening within drilling and practice.
No, not by a long shot.
Right. But yeah, we'll see, like the layperson, the non-fighter who watches a fight may think that's a lot of reps, like a baseball pitcher. A baseball pitcher probably gets about 80 to maybe 120 on the high end pitches in a game, but they're spending 3 or 4 days probably throwing equal that as a part of their pitching practice, working and honing their skill. So all that to be said, right, is we're developing this particular habit or motion of the muscle. And so that muscle is always ready to be called upon despite everything else within the body, right? And so when we go with that stage set in that manner to do a workout, we're already geared, so to speak, and the engine is pumped and primed, as it were, to use those muscles for those endeavors.
So,
is that fair?
Yeah.
Whereas they're not really in a position to really have that. So the way I look at it too is like, if I always like the sense of like bunching up the front of your shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing how the material comes from the back of the shirt as the shirt bunched up. And then when I try to lift my arm, I will feel restriction in where I'm able to. And if I were able to pull enough tension through here, right, and lift with enough force, my shirt would rip. Or I would rip shirt out of my hand such that I could make that motion.
Well, okay, so let's take this from back to the punching analogy, right? An average, if we just take it like MMA, right? An average MMA fighter in a competition round will throw like 13 to, what is it, 40?
Okay.
I think. Or no, I'm sorry, 20 to 40.
Okay.
Roughly 6 to 13 per minute. In a practice round, right? I mean, that number's out the way. I mean, it's an exponent of that, right?
You don't have anybody throwing hits back necessarily. Like, you have segments dedicated purely to that effort.
Yeah. I mean,
if you don't do anything, and again, it's similar to like a NASCAR, right? NASCAR they turn one direction the entire time.
That's a great way to say that. Yeah.
The cars, are already rigged to accommodate that in some manners, right? The way the cars are balanced, and probably even the bodies are tilted in some manner. But like, certain things wear out faster because of that, and they go in to take that. But like, you take a NASCAR car out on the road, man, it ain't gonna drive right. And it's because it's been heavily modified for its specific sport.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's again the same thing in the MMA stuff.
So there's an experiment that you can perform just sitting down, right? As long as you have some space clear. If you take your arm and you just raise it out to the side, whatever that is, like just sitting down, raise it up to the side.
Use my good arm.
That's right.
This one's straight.
Oh, that looks better. Yeah. Right. So if you just raise one out to the side and you look over at it, and what we're looking at right now is the bend of your elbow. Is that pointed up? Is it pointed forward? Or is it pointed more back? Right? The bend, not the point, the bend. It doesn't matter either way. Is the bend pointed to the space behind you? Is it pointed down toward the floor? Or is it pointed more toward the space in front of you? It doesn't matter. Now, however that is, if you raise it up out to the side as high as you can, and then lower it down to a point where the bend of your elbow is below your underarm, then rotate it so that the bend of your elbow is pointed down toward the floor, and then try and lift your arm again. Number one, it won't lift up as high. Number two, you will feel a different muscle responsible for doing that than you did when the bend of your elbow was pointed forward or maybe up. Now, take it, let it go, and rotate the bend of your elbow as far back as you can, so that the point of your elbow is pointed as far forward as you can make it, and then try and lift your arm.
It is bruised, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So try and lift that as high as you can, and you'll find two things. One, limitation. Two, perhaps you will find a different muscle along the front responsible, but what you will almost certainly find is some sort of residual activation on the back of the shoulder, right? Like that muscle feels odd and like it's participatory in you lifting your arm. And it isn't. It's not responsible for you lifting your arm up like that. What it is responsible for is rotating your arm like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're asking it to do is, while it's working, please reposition itself to facilitate movement from other muscles.
Yeah,
and too often,
the cool thing I think about the shoulder socket, right, is that how it's this floating joint in a way, I think is how it's referred to.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's a ball and socket joints, and that it has this like ability to swivel 360. But the way our collarbone sits there, the fancy term glimmeral humeral joint,
Glenohumeral, yeah.
blade and the shoulder blade and the collarbone all sits in there, and it's almost like this team of like three little people working together. And as you lift your arm up in place, they all kind of shift and work around to keep the ball of your humerus inside the little bitty cup, because the actual like socket of our shoulder is very small. It's like two little pads.
Yeah.
Whereas our hip sockets actually have some cups kind of to them. Kind of like if you think about chicken bones or something like that, like how it's like really stuck inside of that joint. Whereas our shoulders have a little bit less to it, if you think of it that way. So again, all the muscles that kind of work around it just really amazes me in that tangent.
Yeah. Well, but you know, if we take what we just talked about and we apply that, right, you have forces acting upon muscles that are trying to perform or trying to fulfill a demand. Right. So if we go back and look at our videos,
I was going to say one last thought, and then be real quick with this.
Yeah.
So looking at this, then speaking to your one of your injuries, then I'm going to annotate, and then you kind of correct me as I go. And get rid of the disappearing ink, though. I want the pen. Give me the pen. So I guess it was the supraspinatus here on top.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I do want the disappearing ink.
What's that?
So if we look kind of at the striations of the muscle or the lines of the muscle, because this is kind of how I think about these things in a very poor layman's sense of it. If we just think about how the striations of this muscle go, you can think the fancy terms are going to be origin and insertion. So that insertions go towards the origin.
Insertion always pulls toward the origin. Yeah.
Right. So in that sense, I believe the supraspinata, right, is pulling this direction towards the center.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. So we see those striations again, and when they squeeze or we use that muscle, it's going to be pulling towards our center. So again, we look at what I think is the oyster shell of the human body, the shoulder blade. Right, it's kind of pulling the top of that shoulder blade maybe up a little bit and towards the center. If we just kind of see those as strings. Now you had said earlier that it was overactivity in your anterior serratus, so it's not shown on this drawing. Yeah, not shown on this drawing, but that would have been a lot of down force pulling the shoulder blade down and even somewhat around the body. So kind of the opposite, or almost literally the opposite direction that the supraspinatus would be pulling against. Fair to say?
Yeah.
And so
that's completely not fair. Accurate. That's accurate to say. Go ahead.
Right. We have this heavy force pulling the shoulder down and kind of to the side of the ribs chronically in training, and then probably in just everywhere in your everyday life without you realizing it, so to speak. And when we went to this, and because it was after competition, this happens a lot of times for competitions or any big feat of high intensity feat, is we'll like white knuckle, so to speak. And it takes a while for those muscles. If we don't purposely lengthen back out, that's what cool downs are so important for after workouts, is so we reestablish these appropriate links to these tissues, so that way we can go back about our normal day-to-day lives and we don't have that heavy habituation set into the joint mechanics. And so from your story, it sounds, and I'm imagining a fighter, your hands are up, but you're also going to be pulling your shoulders down and keeping yourself small, and also trying to keep, again, blocking things as well to keep the vulnerable spots from being vulnerable. So that's, again, intensity from a fight adrenaline from, I'm sure there's probably some money on the line to some degree. You weren't just doing this just for the thrills and, giggles.
Title.
Right. So I can imagine there's a lot of things flowing, like, again, the adrenaline going on, the intensity of that sense of it all. And so then we really, again, get this hyper contractions potentially happening on top of everything else of the habituations of the training. And so to that point, right, we have this anchor pulling the shoulder down. And then when you go to use this guy, I always say, again, we said it already once, a long muscle is a weak muscle, a short muscle is a strong muscle. So this spinata, which has been constantly put in a super weakened position, but you have neurologically actually created a movement of trying to use it often, right? And so now it's in a weakened and disadvantaged position, but you're telling it has to work, and it pulls against the big, stronger brother, and it has nowhere to go. And eventually, over time, that abuse, we don't think of it this way, but in white collar offices, there's this thing called RSI. And that's all this is a repetitive stress injury, right? Because
that's it. Yeah.
They're phrased because it's pulled out of position over time and is running over bony prominence, or again, it's being overworked, and it actually is, as it's working, you actually are pulling that fucker off the bone to some degree. Or the tendon off itself.
All of that, the thing with that, everything that you just described, I mean, we could talk about that from a fighter perspective, and whether or not, it doesn't matter whether or not you're a striker or a grappler or whatever, all of it's applicable. It's also applicable if you play football or either version.
Well, if you sit at a desk, that could be an injury, because
that's what I'm saying.
If you look at me here, right, I'll adjust my camera, but if I have my here and I'm pressing and holding my weight here as I'm typing furiously on whatever I'm working on, right, that same overexertion or that work into that serratus can still be very heavily created, and thus you could end up with that same pattern happening.
I had a client who had exactly that going on. She in her late 60s, and sat like this, right, and holding herself up. Had some of the most like cut ass triceps you've ever seen on a person, because you're always holding yourself up, but her back was rounded, and she was always looking at a monitor this way. You know, she was always looking at a monitor that way with a rounded ass back and these really strong fucking triceps. And with these forward shoulders, right? And so whenever she was trying to move against that and like lift anything up, no way. She was like, I can't. She had to have like stepping stools so that she could reach, so that she could go and like grab stuff out of her cabinets at her home. Unfortunately, I think we got a little away from us, so we can go back and revisit the videos on our next one.
And we'll break them down next time and kind of go more further into. So, and the idea and the hope tonight was, again, giving a little bit of understanding of what makes up the shoulder joint and what is the rotator cuff, not this amorphous thing, but these four individual, the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, the teres minor, and then your subscapula. It's not important that you know them, but they're out there for you to know.
Well, if you think of your shoulder blade, the bone, the infraspinatus as one part of the rotator cuff, and then the supraspinatus is the other. It's like on the other side of the shoulder blade. It's like the bread of a sandwich, right?
Well, I guess what I'm saying though is the names are cool and fun to know. You don't need to know them it rose by any other name, not to get you spiraling into a Shakespeare.
Right.
But all that to be said,
we can go there if you want.
The whole idea here is we're trying to, again, share this knowledge, make it accessible to people so that way they can use it. We've used some home building, some DIY analogies with home remodeling, some driving analogies. The whole sense and hope, for me, at least for me, I believe Paul shares this as well, is sharing this knowledge so that way you can go and use it to help better enrich your life. Movement is not kept behind paywalls, or that knowledge should be something that is universal amongst people.
So demystifying all of it is kind of the primary goal that we have. No one should sit in pain because they feel like a solution isn't accessible.
Right.
If a solution is really accessible, you know what I mean? And now there are some times that we're going to have to sit in pain because there's no solution accessible. You know, if you have any one of a number of things going on, there might be nothing you can do about it. This very often isn't one of them, you know, very often. And it shouldn't be complicated. It shouldn't be exclusive. So next week we'll dissect those videos and we'll come back and we'll talk about them. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about what we talked about here today, you can reach us on Twitch. You can reach out to us on our website, rangefitnessonline.com. You can check us out on Facebook. We're on Blue Sky. We're on YouTube. You can find us everywhere except for X.
Mm-hmm. We're on Meta.
Oh, and TikTok.
We got Meta. We got Facebook, Instagram. We have a TikTok. I haven't messed with it too much though. There is a TikTok out there for I think Range.
We don't do much with it. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to us on any one of our many platforms and any one of our active platforms, and we'll be happy to help you if we can. We're on Twitch 6:30 p.m. U.S. Central Standard every Tuesday until whenever until our voices get hoarse. And then John's on
Thursday mornings, 5:30 until about 7 or 8, depending on just how the flow is going and if I got clients.
Okay. Well, there you go. Yeah. But until then, and until next time,
stay mindful as fuck, y'all.
And don't compensate. Sir John?
Loving that shirt, man. Loving that shirt. You have a great night, Paul.
Thanks, you too, John.